Spider-Man is the friendly neighborhood superhero, the wisecracking web-head swinging between the skyscrapers of New York with jokes and good humor. But what if I told you that behind that smile and the red and blue mask, there's an abyss of darkness? A place where the trauma of being buried alive still echoes in nightmares, where the pain of losing a loved one drives him to beat the Kingpin nearly to death. Today, we're looking into the stories Peter Parker would like to forget. The moments that pushed our hero to the edge, forcing him to question his morality, his humanity, and even his sanity. From profane sacrifices in grim hunt to the tragedy of a father devouring his own son in shed, prepare to meet the darkest, most brutal and shocking side of Spider-Man. In Kraven's last hunt, the villain lures Spidey into an ambush, shoots him with tranquilizers, and simply buries the hero alive, making everyone think he bited the dust. Kraven then embarks on a wave of violent vigilantism, wearing Spider-Man's suit and terrorizing criminals in an absolutely brutal fashion. Spider-Man finally manages to dig himself out and goes after Kraven. The hunter surrenders, declaring he has already made his point and demonstrated his superiority. Kraven then releases Vermin in order to keep Spidey busy while he takes care of his last business. Kraven finds his final moments in his quarters before using a gun to end his own life. This one is easily one of Spider-Man's darkest stories, not just because of Kraven's conclusion, but due to the horrific trauma inflicted on Parker, who had nightmares for a long time. Back in Black, a 2007 storyline, explores Spider-Man's darker side, demonstrating how his morality can be tested when pushed to the limit. The story features Aunt May being shot by an unknown assassin at the start of the plot, sending Spider-Man on a relentless hunt. To represent his violence, grief, and lack of boundaries, he decides to shake the black suit's dust and let his foes see how he is feeling. This darkness goes beyond the external. It influences the internal as well. To find out who is behind his aunt's death, Spider-Man breaks some personal core rules, letting his anger run loose. Eventually, he discovers the mastermind was Wilson Fisk and breaks into the prison where the Kingpin is being held. There, he takes off his mask and says Spider-Man isn't there to kill Fisk, but Peter Parker is. While beating the Kingpin in epic fashion, Parker says Fisk is nothing but a balloon waiting for someone to come along with a needle. And he is that needle. Jean DeWolff was a recurring character in Spider-Man lore, first appearing in Marvel Team Up issue 48 by Bill Mantlo and Sal Buscema in 1976. The detective frequently helped Spidey, being one of the few officers who trusted the wall crawler. But more than anything, DeWolff was a friend, and her brutal and cowardly murder at the hands of the criminal known as the Sin Eater drove Spider-Man on a relentless quest for vengeance. Spidey is aided by Daredevil in this investigation, and it reaches a point where the man without fear himself has to confront the hero, who is on the verge of losing his mind. In the end, they discover that the man who killed Jean DeWolff was Stan Carter, the police officer who informed Spider-Man about her death at the beginning of the story. What a scumbag. In the story Grim Hunt, Kraven's children and wife plan to resurrect the hunter and start the so-called Grim Hunt. As they prepare to attempt an unholy resurrection, Kraven's wife and daughter seek out Spider-Man as they need his blood for the ritual and will do anything to get it. Beyond the dark plot itself, Michael Lark's evocative imagery is unquestionably the story's most impactful component. He sets the scene in darkness and rain, with barely visible figures in the shadows. Aside from the sacrifice scenes, Spider-Man is pinned to a wall, skewered by a spear. This is without a doubt one of the darkest and most violent Spider-Man comics. Shed is an arc about the despairing suffering of one of the webhead's most iconic foes. Dr. Curt Connors is once again giving in to his lizard impulses, but this time in a more violent and irrational way than ever before. The story is heavy on its own as it deals with a man's struggle not to completely destroy himself. He goes after his son, and this is where the standard Spider-Man narrative momentum would usually end. Spidey would show up, calm Curt down, who would be moved by his son's tears and return to normal. This time, however, things go to hell as the lizard simply devours the boy, while part of Curt Connors' conscious mind screams in despair as he watches himself eating his own son. Hands down, one of the heaviest things ever shown in a Spider-Man comic. The story Spider-Man Reign is sort of Marvel's attempt to create a Dark Knight Returns for Peter Parker. The story takes place several years in the future, where New York has gotten rid of supervillains, but also superheroes. The security state is maintained by a government that represses citizens' individual freedoms, claiming this is the price of peace. It is in this scenario that we find Peter Parker, an unemployed florist who is haunted by thoughts of his late wife, Mary Jane. It turns out that in this story, the MJ died of cancer due to her contact with Spider-Man's radioactive fluids. As expected from a story emulating Frank Miller's The Dark Knight, Peter puts the Spider-Man suit back on to take down the authoritarian government and also defeat an old enemy. The death of Gwen Stacy is still one of the most heartbreaking events in Marvel history. The story is a two-part plot that begins with Norman Osborn desperate over his son Harry's drug abuse, who ends up being thrown back into his Green Goblin alter ego. Then he kidnaps Gwen, takes Spidey to the George Washington Bridge, and the two have a fight that ends with the hero's love plummeting to her death. To make matters worse, it was revealed that his web was the cause of Gwen's death, snapping her neck with the whiplash. It was the first time a superhero had failed so miserably to save a loved one. Great powers bring great responsibilities, but also great sorrow. The Spider-Man clone saga was madness, and the scene where Peter Parker screams and punches Mary Jane is an excellent example of the flaws in this extensive arc. Spectacular Spider-Man 226 is about the ongoing battles between Peter Parker and Ben Reilly to see who is the original Peter and who is the clone, leading Peter to a major identity crisis. Furious Peter attacks Ben, believing the medical exam showing his status as a clone was rigged. Mary Jane tries to stop him, but Peter strikes back and punches her in the face, knocking her out. Peter likely only intended to push her away from the fight, but underestimated his own strength. It's hard to measure your acts when you're furious, and things get a lot heavier when we discover that MJ was pregnant. In comics, a hero can die in many ways, and Brian Michael Bendis gives the Peter Parker from the Ultimate Universe the most heroic of deaths. Besides being shot and having a bridge thrown on top of him, Spidey is still attacked by the Sinister Six. He manages to defeat the baddies, but ends up perishing while finishing off Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. Peter smiles as he expires on the ground. For the first time since the terrible death of his uncle, he did everything right. Seeing this young Spider-Man die, saving everyone, while his friends and his aunt weep for his departure, was one of the saddest moments in the entire Ultimate line, and one of the most dark and heavy moments for Spider-Man. Be respectful and press F for Parker in the comments.